Uh, but good. Looking forward to the preaching conference
Yes.
and my visit to your church.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. Yeah, I've been here in Austin for just slightly over a year. I guess a year in July.
I
And
thought it had been about a year.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have loved it. But we're absolutely looking forward to hosting you down here for the preaching conference, and then also preaching here at the church. But I just got to tell you, I really appreciate you taking the time to come to Texas and talk to us about preaching. When this idea came up, I guess I was talking to some others, and we were having kind of our worship session together, our worship meeting with the other clergy and folks involved in worship, and we were talking about how I don't typically preach with notes. And I really learned that with Ryan Tonetti, who was in the D-Men program with me. I know you kind of wrote
Oh,
some nice things about him, about the book that he wrote.
yeah.
And so I was kind of taking people through that process, and that I learned from Ryan, and then that just got it kind of rolled from there into talking about just kind of preaching in general. And I got to thinking about who have my greatest influences been in preaching, and you're among the top folks. And I thought, well, gosh, I know Ryan, I know Bishop. Um, I'll see if there's a way to get them to come down and do this, because I admire both of you so much as preachers and as colleagues and people, and so I'm excited to have you come. Um, one of the things that I hear you say over and over, both in your books and speaking and things like that, is how important preaching is to our faith. We aren't just born with this. It's passed along. Our faith is passed along, and God spoke us into being, and all of that. How important is preaching?
Well, that's, I've found a surprisingly kind of difficult question to answer. One, it's very important simply because it's built right into the Christian faith. Jesus came preaching. Jesus was a preacher. He commissions people to be his spokesperson, preachers. Preaching is just right at the heart of the Christian faith. There may be other faiths that you get to by walks in the woods or sitting alone and meditating on spiritual things. Christianity isn't one of them. You get Christianity through preaching. As Paul says rather bluntly, faith comes through hearing, listening, preaching. And how will they hear without a preacher? Uh, on the other hand, there are a bunch of reasons why people find it difficult to hear that which is spoken. And that applies to preaching or a State of the Union address by the president. We filter, we sort out sounds, the human brain must. Misunderstanding is therefore rampant. I've recently done a book, a study of a church that disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church, my home church,
Hmm.
and I got fascinated by the young preacher there that drew so many to his early services. And I listened to 100 of his sermons online.
Hmm.
And if you talk to people at the church, uh, they acknowledged his preaching was a major reason for their wanting to change denominations and be a different church. And I listened to his sermons, and they sounded really like I had never heard in a United Methodist church. So I became fascinated by that. Well, as I would interview people, I would say, But your preacher says things like hell is a reality, the way you avoid hell, making a personal commitment to Christ. Halloween is evil. The devil uses Halloween. The rapture is real and coming any day. Invariably, the people would say, oh, well, he preaches biblical sermons, and I don't know that I agree with all that. And no, yeah. And I was just amazed at the disconnect between affection, admiration for this preacher, and that the people didn't seem to really connect, lock in, affirm the theology that this preacher was preaching.
Sure.
So, what does that mean? It may mean that preaching is very effective, but it may also mean we preachers need to be realistic about what we ask of preaching. For instance, thinking about that case, I've thought maybe preaching is more of a kind of emotional relationship with the preacher, that it is beyond words. It's more than words. Okay. So maybe preaching is very effective for that, but not effective if our goal is to get across information, to inculcate doctrine, to form people in the faith. Preaching does all of that from time to time, but maybe that's not preaching's chief work. I, I'm in process on this.
Well, I do want to talk about the new book, but you also hear Listener's Dare. It's a book you wrote a couple of years ago. Had the opportunity to read that, and so tie that into what you're saying now, because I know it's important both, because what you're talking about in some form here is how that congregation maybe heard or internalized what he was preaching, even if they didn't buy into the doctrinal things, but also, also important is how a preacher listens to God, listens to the congregation.
Absolutely. Uh, Good speakers are always good listeners. And I remember Fred Craddock talking about as a preacher, he kept a little notebook and he would overhear bits of conversations in a diner, in a hardware store that impressed him that ordinary people are poets oftentimes. We connect with people, we convince people, we control people, other people, we through speech. And so preaching participates in all of that. So, and I remember when I got out of seminary, I was just so impressed. I didn't know how to talk to people. I served a church, rural people, rural Georgia, rural. And it was almost like if someone asked me a question, such as, I've tried to be a good person all my life. I can't understand why God took my husband so early in our marriage. I just wonder if maybe I did something wrong. Okay, that's the kind of theological question. And about God. But it was almost like I had to say to people, hey, if you'll read these three books, get back to me. Here are three people who've talked about theodicy or divine will, and otherwise I couldn't talk to them. So one thing I did, I subscribed to the Upper Room. At that time, the Upper Room, a publishing arm of the Methodist Church, published all kind of devotional books, collections of sermons and things. And I remember reading that their standard for writing for the Upper Room publications was an eighth grade reading level. So the language was succinct and it was fairly simple and straightforward. So I read those Upper Room books, and in a sense, they taught me how to talk again to ordinary, normal, everyday people, and in a way they could understand.
Hmm.
And so uh, that so listening to people, I said kind of jokingly after my first few months at that church, I knew more about hog farming than any Methodist preacher in the world. And I would go to these hog farms and talk to them, and I was just shocked at how complicated a business hog farming is, and how these hog farmers were connected to what was happening in the Soviet Union at that time, and grain prices and meat prices. They were selling pork to Asia. Yeah. But why did I visit there? Well, to get to know the people, to connect with the people. But also, I realized I was being formed into being a preacher that could talk to those people, and in a language they could understand better than the language I had sort of been trained to speak to them in.
Sure, sure. Well, I grew up on a farm out in West Texas, and people will say, did you think about farming, growing up farming, and doing that?" And I thought, well, no, I may have a doctorate from Duke Divinity, but I never thought that I was smart enough to be a farmer. Uh, so it uh, it
Right.
it's um, it's important, and I think that's one of the things that you are very well known for is is taking the Word of God, taking because people want to know what is God saying in the midst of the world that we're living in, the nation that we're living in, the all the things that are going on. What is where is God? What is God saying about this? And you have an uncanny ability of being able to convey that in a way that doesn't sound like uh, an academic theologian so much as a theologian with academic credentials who has the understanding and the discernment, but can relay that in a way that people can understand. I
Well,
appreciate
thank
it so
you.
much.
I think that's, uh, and by the way, you see this sort of service in preaching in Paul, as he famously, says, "When I was among you, I was determined to say nothing except cross. I Everything I said to you was cross, cross, cross." Or, he just said, I didn't come with lofty words of wisdom, impressive speech. Well, here is Paul saying, I really struggled not only with what I said to you, but how I put it. That for me to talk about Jesus Christ with you required me to carefully consider my rhetoric. How was I speaking to you? And for what purpose was I speaking to you?
Well, so do you think uh, not only do you have an uncanny ability to be able to speak in a way that resonates with people, but also you're among those preachers that is able to tackle difficult conversations in a sermon. Difficult, and I say conversations because it's that's in part how that goes. But you've never been one to shy away from uh, a controversial stand or stance or anything, not because you were saying anything for the sake of controversy, but because it was a nudging from God. Talk about that a little bit because I think that's a struggle that a lot of preachers have is how do I say this difficult thing for the congregation to hear? And I know it's important to say.
Well, that's an important thing for a preacher to ask and to struggle with. And I love the way that preachers often have a whole set of skills in their toolkit for communicating difficult truth, for communicating that which maybe people would rather as soon left unsaid. And preachers will say things like, Well, this is not necessarily me pushing this, but I do think the Bible says this, the text says this, and so let's listen to the text together. Or they'll say, "Now, before you get your defenses up about this, let's try to humbly listen and see if we hear a new word today." I remember preaching a sermon, beginning a sermon on Proverbs, and I said in the beginning, I read the text, and I said, "That's a noble thought. That's a kind of a nice thing to think about, particularly you young people who are in school." And then I paused for effect, and I said, "The trouble is, none of you believe this. There's nobody here at Duke University that actually believes what these proverbs are saying." And so, what I'm saying here is that, in a way, as a preacher, you're always talking about something that people resist. You're always talking about something that maybe people would rather not hear said. You're always talking about something that maybe people have used their very best intellectual defenses to avoid hearing. And so I'm talking about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Remember the kind of response Jesus got to his preaching. Well, therefore, in a sense, preachers are those who are always talking about controversial issues, always talking about things that might make people angry, or things that somebody might come back and say, "Hey, I disagree with you. I don't see it that way." The wonderful thing about being a pastor who's a preacher, and I think that is the normative way to preach, by the way, the wonderful thing about that is you have all kind of skills of saying to them, "Huh, oh really? Hey, I'd like to hear more from you. Got time for Coffee Monday?" Or, by the way, we're going to be discussing this subject at the Wednesday night learning gathering. Be sure you're there because we'll want to hear more about your views on this subject. So, in a way, preaching, it's kind of weird to hear preachers say, "I just find it really hard. There are just some subjects you can't talk about. People get so upset. People don't want to hear it. It's controversial." It's fair for preachers to worry about that kind of thing. But I know in the season of disaffiliation that my church has been through, one of the most frequent criticisms I've heard from laity who wanted to stay United Methodist and not disaffiliate, those laity often say, "I wish our preacher had said something. Our preacher just acted like he didn't care, or he said, 'I'm neutral,' or 'I'm just here for y'all to have a discussion and then vote.'" No, preachers are there to preach, and preachers are always talking about a contested truth, otherwise known as Jesus Christ.
Mhm. Yeah, I heard that so much during that time. Well, it's this is not my church. This is your church. It's up to you guys to decide. And I kind of took the position that if we're called to be pastors of this church, it's important to pastor through even those difficult discernment discussions. But so yeah, I've got your book here. I read it this weekend and thoroughly enjoyed it. The Church We Carry. I was curious. I know you kind of start off the book and talking about how, gosh, nobody ever said to you, "Well, why don't you write a book about that?" Uh, but in all honesty, what led you to say, I'm gonna, this is a painful time in the history of the church, but also in your home church. What led you to want to write about that?
Well, I think my surprise at my home church, second largest United Methodist congregation in South Carolina, one of the oldest South Carolina churches, founded after a visit by Francis Asbury in the 1800s. So it was a shock to learn that this church was contemplating leaving the denomination that had birthed it and carried it throughout its history. And I wanted to know why. Here's a church that hadn't had much conflict, that had always been a kind of loyal member of the denomination, $420,000 a year paid to the United Methodist Conference through apportionments. So I started asking questions. Hey, help me understand how this happened at my home church. What were the factors involved? Who were the personalities that brought this about? And that led to an even deeper interest as I found out it was complicated, it was complex. There were many different voices in the situation. There were many different reasons proffered for why this occurred. And that then led me to the book after a year of conversation and reflection, the book being The Church We Carry,
Mhm.
Lost Leadership and the Future of the Church.
Yeah, well, tell me about the title of it, "The Church We Carry." Where did I, I think I understand that as a title of this book, but can, tell me more about the.
Well, the church that carries each of us into and through the Christian faith can sometimes be a burden for us to carry.
Mm,
From the beginning, the church has never lived up to Jesus' expectations for it. We are the body of Christ, but we are a body that's got wounds and weaknesses and problems and disabilities. And so the image of the church we carry, I realized that my home church had been memories, experience of Jesus that I had growing up in my home church had carried me through ministry, but also had to admit that there were burdens for my church. I grew up in illegally racially segregated South Carolina.
mhm.
My home church, I didn't know this until later, delving into the history of the church. My home church, when I was 8 years old, voted not to seat persons of African Americans if they showed up at our church, which they mostly didn't. Well, that's a burden to carry, that sort of knowledge. Then I also had to admit that I was a burden for my church to carry, in that, and I'm not just talking about my unruly teenage years, but also my writing. There were times when I had praised what I'd received from my home church, and then times when I had published things that were critical of my home church. And it was a burden to carry. And I started out my study of my home church sort of thinking, oh, well, tell me about so and so. Oh, yeah, I remember him. And oh, that's why, yeah, it brings back a great memory of when I was growing up in the church. And yet, halfway through, somebody at the church ordered everybody at the church to stop talking to me or returning my phone calls, and everything shut down. And suddenly, I, for the first time in my life, became perceived as an enemy of the church that I carry. And so all that is a burden. And maybe the book, I'm hoping the book is of relevance and interest to people who don't know anything about Buncombe Street Methodist Church or care, but that it's a microcosm, a vignette, a snapshot of a church during a very important time in American church life. And one of the challenges those of us who are ordained leaders of the church now have is we got to somehow carry the church that we've received from the past, bear that into the future. And that's job number one right now. I'm hoping that what I learned and that in my book will help pastors do that right
Mhm.
now.
Well, yeah, as I read the book, and I've never been to Buncombe Street. I don't know anything about it. I think I've only even been to South Carolina once or twice. Um,
Okay.
but as I read it, there was so much in the book that I resonated with. Not because none of the churches that I ever attended or pastored ended up disaffiliating. Some of them went through some very difficult discussions and all of that, but so much of what's in the book I resonated with either personally or through conversations I had with other Methodist clergy that had experienced. So it was somewhat of a wave of um, for me as I read it, it stirred up a little bit of anger that I still probably harbored, and but also you included a lot of grace as well, and there were funny parts and nostalgic parts, and same thing with me as I look back at churches that I served or attended, and it really felt like a very emotional um, book for you to write.
Mm-hmm.
Was it, and I can't remember if it was in the postlude somewhere, you quoted someone about writing a memoir, to be careful about writing
Oh,
a
Annie
memoir.
Dillard, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, that's right. About how that can kind of stomp on your memories or
Yeah.
collections. Was it a healing process of writing? Was it how did it how did that go for you?
Uh, maybe I think maybe it was grief work to do this. Maybe you could look through the book and see a bunch of stages of grief, as we used to talk
Hmm.
about that.
Sure.
Um, in that I had anger, I had surprise, disappointment that this my home church would somehow talk itself into making this move and do some very questionable things, I thought, and and never talk to me about it. In fact, trying to keep it from me. And yet, at the same time, I also stayed with the issue long enough to say, wow, many of the people who led the disaffiliation wanted a more vibrant, committed, active missional church. Me too.
Mhm.
Good. I'd like to be part of that kind of church. I ultimately felt they went about it in the wrong way and they had mistaken intentions that I said to them, changing denominations, changing one aging, mostly white mainline denomination for another aging, mostly white mainline denomination ain't going to get you where you would like to go. That really has nothing to do with your future. Well, unfortunately, they got talked into thinking it would, and so they left. But I think at the end, I said, I got to admit, I'm old. The church I remember, my home church, ain't there anymore. If it ever was, as it was in my memories, I'm leaving. Well, they're arriving. They're doing something that is very hard to do in the United Methodist Church, and that is have an aging, active, inner city, mainline Protestant congregation. They're doing that fairly well.
Mhm.
I'm not sure I know how to do that or ever did that. So by the end of the book, I try to give them credit and I try to say, who knows? Maybe they are the future and I'm not.
Yeah. Well, I apologize for putting on two pairs of glasses here, but I, as I age my eyes anyway.
Yes.
So you mentioned the end of the book, and I highlighted what I think is probably my favorite part of the book, and it's the very last couple of sentences, which I think sums up where God is calling us. You write, though the church messes up and falls short of Christ's expectations, he keeps showing up and taking matters in hand, so determined in Jesus to have us in his mystic sweet communion together. Therein is hope. Um,
Oh, glad you heard that.
well, that like I said, as I read the book, there was those places, I guess, still of anger that maybe I harbored in having to go through all of this and seeing
Hmm.
people that I love deeply go through this, and it tear apart families in many ways,
Hmm.
churches so um I don't know. You closed on a what I think is a special word of grace and recognizing we ain't all perfect, um, and the grace of Jesus Christ will prevail if we let it, and I love that. So
Good. That, our hope has never been that we're going to purify or get it all together in the church from the beginning. Hey,
Mhm.
read Paul's letters. Uh, our hope is where it always has been. It's in Jesus Christ. He will have a people. He will ultimately triumph. He will get what he wants. He will save the world. That's not in dispute. The question is, will we be part of that? Will we do the necessary work, believing, hoping that will enable us to hitch on to where he's going?
Yeah. Well, I've only got a couple more minutes here, but I appreciate you taking the time today. I look forward to the preaching conference in November. You mentioned
Oh
Fred
yeah,
earlier. I had to reach into my top drawer here and pull out my little Fred Craddock notebook that I keep on my. Uh,
good.
but anything that kind of
Oh,
close
I'm
words that you have to
excited about
say?
our conference in November. The I think the best way for preachers to be reinvigorated, to grow in our preaching, to re-excite ourselves about preaching, is to talk shop with other preachers. And I love the way you have set things up so that there's maximum opportunity to look over the shoulders of those who are trying to preach, a couple of us, and to talk with other preachers about the challenges of preaching, to look at some examples, and to judge, gee, how well did that work? What about it didn't work? And all. Great way for preachers to gain sustenance for our vocation. So, looking forward to our preaching conference.
Yes, me too. And again, once again, I do appreciate you so much, and looking forward to having you here in Austin.
Okay.